Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here. And in this video, I am not going to talk about astrology. I'm going to talk about Sri Ramana Maharshi. And the reason I want to talk about this is because um, uh, Ramana Maharshi, he's an Advaita Vedantist, a Hindu guru who is extremely enlightened. I studied spirituality for years. I mean, I've always had a fascination um, for spirituality going back to my teenage years, but in my late 20s, I discovered my teacher, my spiritual teacher, and then it blossomed from there. And I mean, this is not, it's indirectly related, I guess, my story. Sri Ramana Maharshi was part of that journey for me. He is one of the most enlightened beings to set foot, to incarnate on this planet in the last, in, in any modern times. In any case, I'm going to share my screen. I feel like it's worth sharing. I think, people would benefit from knowing about Sri Ramana Maharshi. And so it's part of my interest to talk about it. And it feels so much of my life, this kind of understanding, Advaita Zen, because I think it gives you a very big framework from which to work with. Okay, so like if you understand the big picture, everything else is sort of, easy and chill and relaxed. It really, really takes out all the thorns and spikes of life. In a sense, it's very deeply relaxing. And if you're ready for it, I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's a very, very relaxing philosophy. Sri Ramana Maharshi. This was what he looked like in middle age. I don't know how old he is at older age. At least on one's birthday, one should mourn one's entry into this world, samsara. To glorify and celebrate it instead is like delighting in decorating a corpse. To seek oneself and merge in the self, that is wisdom. I mean, if you're coming from a Western background, which most people are, and you hear this kind of thing, it's kind of sounds strange or odd, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. I want to read some stuff of his. So obviously, if this is something you're not open to, don't watch it. But I think some people will find it interesting. Some people already have similar, studies on their own. But I just want to read and comment from my perspective, because this is something I've given lots of thought to and spent years and years investigating, and it's helped me tremendously. So the quintessence of Ramana Maharshi's teachings found a small booklet called Who Am I? And just a little background, Ramana Maharshi around age 16 had like an experience where somebody died and he himself wanted to experience death. So he laid down and he let his ego die and he became enlightened, right? And then he left home because he felt called by his intuition, by his consciousness, to go to this mountain, Arunachala. See, Arunachala. That's where he went, and he set up his home in the mountain, and then people came and took care of him because he was in deep, deep samadhi, meditation, becoming, refining his enlightenment perspective. And he was profoundly enlightened. Like, I mean, the guy was just, God consciousness, like Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness. Some people think, oh my God, there's only one ever. No, there's not. That's nonsense. There are many people who have reached that level of consciousness. It's just we in the West are very rigid, dogmatic in our thinking, and think only somebody like only one person could ever, and they're the son of God. It's just nonsense. It's like dogmatic BS. There are many people all throughout history. Sorry, it's hot here. Who have reached the same levels of consciousness. All right. So this is the first set of instructions given by Ramana Maharshi. They're direct from his unique experience of self-realization. So useful to understand the enlightened perspective. If you don't understand the enlightened perspective, you're gonna get caught up in some bullshit in this lifetime. 100% you will, because you're not gonna understand what life is, where it's going, what the whole universe is all about. Right? This is what the universe is about. This is what all of life, everywhere, in the whole everything is about. Okay, that's what this is addressing. So you can download this book, Who Am I, if you like. I'm just going to read, this is some, a boiled down version of that. Every living being longs to be happy, untainted by sorrow, and everyone has the greatest love for himself, which is solely due to the fact that happiness is his real nature. Hence, in order to realize that inherent and untainted happiness, which indeed he daily experiences when the mind is subdued in deep sleep, it is essential that he should know himself. For obtaining such knowledge, the inquiry, who am I, in quest of the self, is the best means. So, this is my little commentary. In deep sleep, we love deep sleep. We don't often think about this, but in deep sleep, not talking about dreaming, because there are many periods of sleep where we're not dreaming, where the self is lost. Like, there's no real identifiable self. We're not really being like, I'm sleeping. No, we're lost. We're gone. But we enjoy it. We know we enjoy it because we wake up and we're like, oh, I want to go back to sleep, right? Sleep's enjoyable. We know it's enjoyable, and there's no sense of self, right? We get a break from the self. We get a break from this ego identity, and we're happy. So that's a clue. That's a huge clue that Ramana Maharshi is pointing to, that we're happy when we are not in ourself, right? And this is one of the things about enlightenment, that you can achieve the state on an ongoing basis. Happiness, no sense of self, right? For obtaining such knowledge, the inquiry, who am I, in quest of the self, is the best means. And this is important to understand, because in the West, we don't really look at this. Very little, people, we go I, and then we just leave it at that. Well, start going I, and I've done this a lot. I'm not just talking out my butt. I've done this like for years and years and years. I. What is that? I. What is that referring to? Like, try and figure out what the I is referring to, because all it is a sound in your head. Like, if you're saying it, you're vocalizing it. If you're not saying it, thinking it, it's a thought. Who recognizes the thought? Who is the I referring to? What is that? Don't just take it for granted. It's not a granted. It's not just like, oh, I know that. We just move on. I already know that. No, you don't. That's the whole point. You have no fucking clue who you are. Like, everyone. Like, that's the bottom line. You don't know who you are, and you have to try and sort of stop basing everything. I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm poor, I'm ugly, I'm miserable, I'm famous, I'm good looking, all this stuff. That's nonsense, because you're basing it on something that's a false premise. You don't know who you are, therefore you can't be any of those things. You haven't identified yourself. You don't know who you are, you don't know what you are. You're not the body, because the body is just it's a vehicle for the self. But find the self. Find out who's thinking. Find out who's saying I. Watch your thoughts. Pay attention to your thoughts. Find out who the thinker is. Don't just assume, because that's the basis. That's what the whole thing is pointing to. Is there's an assumption here. And remember, assumptions make an ass out of you and me. Is that how it goes? Anyway. Question yourself. You are not who you think you are. You're assuming you are, and then everything else. So it's like building a castle on quicksand. Like, how good is it? Like, you build this giant castle, and the whole thing is like, get topple over because you have no foundation, right? Find out who you are. That's the whole point. Who am I? I am pure awareness. Now, don't just settle for this. This is just a pointer. This awareness is, by its very nature, being consciousness, bliss, Satchit Ananda. Satchit Ananda. If the mind, which is the instrument of knowledge and is the basis of all activity, subsides, the perception of the world as an objective reality ceases. Remember in physics that if you study physics deeply enough, what they come to realize is that nothing is anything, and we're just, it's all hallucination. We're seeing one spectrum of reality based on our senses, and and that matter is energy and it doesn't exist really. But this is the reality in experiential. There is no objective reality if the nature of the mind subsides. We're not the mind, by the way. Unless the illusory perception of the serpent in the rope ceases, the rope on which the illusion is formed is not perceived as such. This analogy is based on the traditional story of a man who sees a rope at twilight and, mistaking it for a serpent, is afraid without cause. So what that points to is that our emotions are based in thoughts, number one. We think something and then we experience it. We don't experience emotions, generally speaking, without a thought. So thoughts precede emotions. So emotions are tied to thoughts, first of all. Second of all, it's all about perception, right? Not objective reality, but how we perceive things. If we see a rope as a snake, then we're going to get scared. But if we realize it's just a rope, the fear ceases. So that's a subjective reality, perception. Similarly, unless the illusory nature of the perception of the world as an objective reality ceases, unless we stop seeing the snake in the world and see it as a rope, the vision of the true nature of the self on which the illusion is formed is not obtained. But he's saying it's all illusion. We're seeing a snake when it's really just a rope. And that's the whole of life. And that's the whole thing. That's the whole game. So you need a little smacking around in order to realize that the snake you think you're looking at is just a rope. And that we are not these individual, oh, I'm a sinner. And, I could go down that rabbit hole, but, that God is up there and Jesus, or however you want to port it, Buddha, or, Allah, all whatever your framework is, it's just all made up. It's all fantasy. The only reality is that this is it, right? Like we are God living out a game, because what else are you going to do when you're God? We are rays of God, and if you're sick of it, if you've had enough, you can remember your way back to God consciousness. And I'm saying it helps, even if you're not done, playing the game. At some point, it's really, really powerful and empowering to remember that it's just a game. And you're like, okay, I can see the end in sight somewhere down the road. This is all a game. Let's not take any of this too seriously. Let's just be light and have fun and enjoy ourselves. The mind is a wondrous power residing in the self. It causes all thoughts to arise. Apart from thoughts, there is no such thing as mind. Therefore, thought is the nature of mind. Apart from thoughts, there is no independent entity called the world. In deep sleep, there are no thoughts, and there is no world. In the states of waking and dream, there are thoughts, and there is a world also. I mean, often you hear like scientists be like, oh, consciousness is a projection of the brain. And that's backwards. You don't even know you have a brain without consciousness. That's the cart before the horse. You can't recognize the brain except through consciousness. If you're not conscious, so it's like the whole thing is dependent on consciousness, yet they're saying consciousness is a product. Logically, they're wrong. These scientists are not using good logic, right? They're saying consciousness is an emanation of the brain. We can turn it off, doesn't exist without the body. You don't know that without consciousness, buddy. Sorry. Consciousness is the filter which everything goes through. We don't know anything without consciousness. So consciousness is the nature of things. And secondly, it's not the brain. The brain is just another vehicle. Again, the cart before the horse. The brain is just another vehicle for consciousness, because, we have consciousness regardless of, brain. I mean, I don't know if there's evidence of that in this segment here where I'm talking about, but like, okay, just in deep sleep, then at least for the sense of self, we have consciousness without sense of self, right? We feel happiness. We know we wake up and we're like, okay, I wish I was still sleeping. So let's see. There's no such thing as mind. Mind is thought. Therefore, the thought of thought is the nature of the mind. Apart from thoughts, okay. Apart from thoughts, there's no independent entity called the world. So the world is dependent upon the mind and thoughts. Just as the spider emits the thread of the web out of itself and again withdraws it into itself, likewise, the mind projects the world out of itself and again resolves it into itself. When the mind leaves the self, the world appears. Therefore, when the world appears, the self does not appear. And when the self appears, the world does not appear. When one personality inquires into the nature of the mind will subside, leaving the self as residue. The mind always exists only by depending on something gross. It cannot exist independently. It is the mind that is called the subtle body or the soul. I mean, I find this stuff so interesting. In part, like you have to, I think one of the things that really helps you to tap into this is if you actually start questioning yourself, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Because then you can start to unravel the assumption, the conditioning that you are a self. And when you realize you're not a self, you realize that the world is not nearly as objectively real as you once imagined it to be. It's sort of unraveling the firmness of life itself, and you start to see that life itself is a fabrication of conditioned mind, a whole bunch of conditioned minds agreeing upon certain hallucinations, and that it's all imagined. And this is something you can realize, and it's empowering and it's liberating. So yes, I suggest you ask yourself, who am I? That which rises as I in the body is the mind. If one inquires as to where in the body the thought I rises first, one would discover that it rises in the heart. That is the place of the mind's origin. Even if one thinks constantly, I, one will be led to that place. Try it. Of all the thoughts that arise in the mind, the I thought is the first. It is only after the rise of the I thought the other thoughts occur. For who do we assume these thoughts belong to? I. It's all just like, you know, if you ever put something together from pieces, you realize that when it's all put together in the finished product, that it's just composed of pieces, right? Whatever it is. And if you could understand all the different pieces that go into a thing, it's not a mystery anymore. It's not like, oh, this is just like one unified whole. We are made of pieces too, human beings. And when you start to pull apart the pieces, you realize that we are not just this one whole thing, and that we're just composed of all different sorts of pieces, put together. And we call ourselves I, but it's really just we're just a product of everything but I. There really is no self. When they say there's no self, there truly is no self. We're just pieces, bits and pieces of the world around us. And we're put together by our parents, our family, our society, our school, all of these things. And we're just an empty consciousness, really, that's taken on some identity. And so that's, understanding this, not just conceptually, but like when you realize, when you start to take action towards that goal of finding out, don't just assume, don't just like, okay, I get it, I'm too late. Like actually write it down. Like, who am I? Who am I? Like to really try and get into that question. That's going to do something mechanically. There's a mechanical action inside your body. It works on your 12th house. It works on your subconscious. It undoes lots of conditioned assumptions over the years that you are this unified whole individual, but you are not. I at least hope to, plant a seedling of doubt, a seed of doubt in your mind to start questioning this. You know, you're not who you think you are. With repeated practice in this manner, the mind will develop the power to stay in its source. When the mind that is subtle goes out through the brain and the sense organs, the gross names and forms appear. When it stays in the heart, the names and forms disappear. Not letting the mind go out, but retaining it in the heart is what is called inwardness. Letting the mind go out of the heart is known as externalization. Thus, when the mind stays in the heart, the I, which is the source of all thoughts, will go, and the self, which never exists, which ever exists, will shine. So he's saying the I, which is the source of all thoughts, will go. That's the individual sense of self, the ego. This illusion. I'm an individual. I'm a sinner. Jesus died for my sin. Like, I'm not trying to pick on that religion, that belief system alone. I'm just trying to point out that this idea of individuality, the problem with that framework, with that mindset, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, any other religion, Islam, Buddhism, whatever, where you are separate, is that it gives you freedom to just be a lowlife. You're excusing yourself. You're off the hook. You're like, I'm a lowly sinner, therefore I'm just going to keep sinning because I'm nowhere near Jesus and God, or however you want to call it. Doesn't matter. That's an excuse. That's a psychological out. That's a cop out, right? You're off the hook when you say that, and that's why people do it. I'm not holy. I'm nowhere near Jesus. Jesus, let me pray. Let me bow down to Jesus because it'll allow me to keep sinning. Like, Jesus died for my sins, therefore I can keep sinning. I'm not perfect. I'm not God, therefore I'm going to keep sinning. These are all excuses. And then they think it's like oh no, I could never assume myself to be, equal. This is arrogance, right? Because it's denying reality that we are God. We are God. What is all God? Do you think God is the separate entity? Like, this is God, this is not God. Bullshit. Like, that's stupid. You're kindergarten if you think that God is a contained individual up there in the sky, and then this is all not God, I'm not God, and this is not God, the computer's not God, everything's not God. It's so ridiculous. Fantasy. None of it's true. Who says? I mean, at least start to question it, because you can't just believe what you're told. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just be like, well, my parents told me, my culture told me, therefore it's the truth. Stop believing them. Start figuring it out for yourself. Maybe I'm wrong, but figure it out. Find out. Is God a separate entity, or is God everything? Is this all God? Maybe this is all God. Maybe God's having a hallucination. Or maybe God's just having fun. He's playing. So he forgets. How else is going to have fun if he knows everything? He pretends he forgets. He pretends he doesn't know anything. He starts out as a lowly whatever, amoeba or something. He's like, let's see what this is all about. That's all God. What else is he going to do? He's got infinite space and time and everything, right? And so we go on this big journey thinking we're not God, and that God is up there, and God has a son named Jesus, or, God becomes enlightened, becomes a Buddha, whatever your belief system is. Who cares? Right? It's all the same. Break out of it. I forgot what I was saying. Other than inquiry, there are no adequate means to make the mind permanently subside. If the mind is controlled through other means, it will appear to be controlled, but will rise again. Through regulation of breath, the mind will become calm, but it will remain calm only as long as the breath remains controlled. When the breath is no longer regulated, the mind will become activated and start wandering. So yes, I mean, although there are many helpful practices, we should not put too much stock in those practices. They're good for limited means, temporary means, all sorts of control things. Breath control, food control. Food control is important, right? But it's not the only thing, right? Like the practice of breath control, meditation on the forms of God, repetition of mantras, and restriction on diet, that's what I was talking about, are temporary aids for the stilling of the mind. Through the practice of meditation on the forms of God and through repetition of mantras, the mind attains one-pointedness. For such a focused mind, self-inquiry will become easy. By observing diet restriction, the quality of mind improves, which helps self-inquiry. However, a sinful person may be, if he would zealously carry on meditation on the self, he would most assuredly get reformed. The mind should not be allowed to wander towards worldly objects and what concerns other people. However bad other people may be, one should bear no hatred for them. All that one gives to others, one gives to oneself. If the truth is understood, who will not give to others? When oneself arises, all arises. When oneself becomes calm, all becomes calm. To the extent we behave with humility, to that extent good will result. These are all excellent pointers. I agree with all of them. Humility is very important. Giving is very important. If the mind becomes still, one may live anywhere. What exists in truth is the self alone. He's calling it the self. You can call it God, you can call it consciousness. These names really don't matter. You can see there are a billion names, and people get attached to like names and forms. And I mean, some people are so small-minded, they think that their particular religion that they were born into is the one truth of the whole creation of the whole universe, right? That's silly. That's really, really silly. Really, really egotistical. Like I just got so lucky in the whole goddamn universe. I was born into the one little, minuscule teaching that was the only truth. Like, give me a goddamn break. And they have the audacity to deny everyone else in the world, everyone else in the universe, right? It's a big universe. And say that, oh, you're all wrong. I'm right. I just happen to be right. My parents were right. My the church I go to is right. It was the right one. I just got really lucky, in this infinite universe. I just happened to land in the one right. I was born into the one right situation, the one truth where everyone else was wrong. I'm smart. You're dumb. That's just it. Me and my parents and my church, we have it all figured out. Everyone else sucks. Everyone else is dumb. Everyone else is an idiot. They're all wrong. We're right. I mean, come on. What exists in the truth is the self alone. And the reason I can compare this is because this is not doing that. This is not saying I'm right, everyone else is wrong. This is saying it's all God, it's expression. It's not denying anything. It's not denying Christianity. It's not denying Buddhism. It's not denying Taoism. It's not denying Judaism. It's saying that's all just fun and games within the greater context. That God, which is everything in the whole universe, the self, that's all that exists. What exists in truth is the self alone. The world, the individual soul, and God are appearances in it like silver in a mother of pearl. It's all appearances. There's no division when you get down to it. There's no Trinity. There's no Father, Son, Holy Ghost. You can divide it. You can divide it in all sorts of ways, in many different ways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, I deal with numbers. That's the whole point. There's so many different divisions. They're all fabrications of the mind. These three appear at the same time and disappear at the same time. It's all the mind. It's all play of the mind. The self is that where there is absolutely no I thought. That is called silence. The self itself is the world. The self itself is I. The self itself is God. All is Shiva, the self. Some people will be afraid that they say like, well, without the mind, there's nothing. And I'm afraid of nothing. And I don't want nothing. I want something. Therefore, I'm going to work with the mind. But remember, the reason Ramana Maharshi always talks about deep sleep is because it serves as a reassurance that when the mind is dispersed, when it's no longer forming itself into an I, we're happy. There is no nothingness the nothingness that we call nothingness is great. It's a wonderful experience. The experience that happens without the mind is still experienced. The soul still experiences. It's just not using the mind, right? That never changes. That never stops. It's never nothing like we imagine. We imagine nothing, but then the reality of nothing is wonderful. It's like we prefer it. It's like being in deep sleep, where we're just like deeply nourished and deeply rested and resting, becoming nourished without the self remembrance of the I, without having the effort to put, without efforting to create the I, which is an effort and is a constant drain on our energies, whether we realize it or not. That's why we love to sleep, right? That's why as we get older, you don't sleep less. I mean, some people have sleeping problems, but ideally we'd want to sleep more, right? We're tired. We want to sleep. He who gives himself up to the self, that is God, is the most excellent devotee. Giving oneself up to God means constantly remembering the self. Whatever burdens are thrown on God, he bears them all. Since the supreme power of God makes all things move, why should we, without submitting ourselves to it, constantly worry ourselves with thoughts as to what should be done and how, what should not be done and how not? We know that the train carries all loads. So after getting on it, why should we carry our small luggage on our head to our discomfort instead of putting it down in the train and feeling at ease? So Ramana Maharshi here seemed to pointing to some sort of what's the word? Is it fatalism? Where everything is sort of God makes all things happen, everything is pre-decided. I forget the word, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Predestined. There is some truth to that. I don't think it's the only truth. I think life is happening spontaneously. But the point is, we don't need to worry about it, right? I mean, if life is happening spontaneously and decisions are made, we don't need to worry what the mechanism is. We don't need to worry so much about, oh, I might not, if I don't try hard enough, I might not make it, and blah 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 and blah. And then all this and that happens. I might be poor, and my partner might leave me, and I might become miserable and all that. And I know there's a great fear and great motivation behind through fear. And I have it too. Like I'm not, but this is one of the things that helps me tremendously is always think back to Ramana Maharshi's teachings and my own experiences. And like I said before, like I don't claim to be like some enlightened being or anything like that, but these things have called me for many years, decades. So I have a glimpse of them. Like just because I'm not on the mountaintop doesn't mean I can't see it, right, in the distance, right? And I'm pointing this out because I think it's really helpful to people. It's tremendously helpful to me. It's incredibly relaxing, and understanding that God makes all things happen. I know that, and my faith. This is what true faith is. Faith is the sort of deep. It's not. Faith is not like leaping off a cliff or something like that. Faith is the deep, or maybe it is in some cases, but faith is the deep, in my experience, the deepening experiential knowledge that life is just, life is fair, life is balanced, and life is provides what we need when we need it. And it's not going to it's not going to fulfill our fantasies. That may happen on a rare occasion. Somebody has certain karma and they become rich and famous. It's not going to happen unless you're ready for it, unless you're karmically ready for it, right? So don't beat yourself up because you're not like as successful as you think you should be or want to be, or like, I mean, it's like, it's kind of ridiculous when we look at this thing. I mean, because it's like, do you have enough money to live and survive? Yeah, maybe you don't have enough money. Maybe you can't buy everything you want, but so what? Who cares, right? Like maybe you don't need all those things that you think you want, and you're just like, Maybe what you really need is to realize you have enough. I mean, God, understand that this is all God, this is all consciousness, this is all the self, and this is God's life, and that it's all perfect as it is, right? We have everything we need. We don't necessarily get everything we want, and that's a good thing, because suffering is how we grow. And that if we got everything we want, we would not have the opportunity to grow and evolve. And so, yeah, they don't call it growing pains for nothing. We're growing out of our limited, hard, rigid, dry, caked on, baked on dogmatic belief systems. That's what we have to grow out of. And it grows out of them through suffering. And it's like the shell, it's a chicken in the shell. We have to break through the shell of our own, dogmatic creations. And it's all in the head. It's all up here. It's all in the mind. We create our own prisons through what we believe. And those are our belief systems are fueled by fear. Oh my God, God, and like angry God and hell, and if I don't do it right, I'm going to hell. Come on, that's nonsense. We all suffer, first of all, whether we're alive or dead. I mean, there's suffering after death, sure, but that's neither here nor there. Hell is what we create in this life by our actions, and we don't necessarily get out of hell by being afraid of hell and by believing in hell. We get out of hell by not hurting anyone and not hurting ourselves, and spreading joy and wisdom and love and benefit to all of humanity, right? Within context of who we are and what we have the energy to offer. Like, not everyone can give everything. Like, I don't have the money to be a philanthropist, right? So I don't have the energy to do a whole bunch of stuff, but I do what I can. I make these astrology videos, and I'm not charging for them. I try and think about what would be good within what I have to give, the energy. What can I give that would actually help? And so this is one of the things that came up for me. Talking about Ramana Maharshi and introducing him to some of you. And, I'm going to probably keep doing similar things along with astrology like this. Any case, guys, extremely, extremely helpful to better your life. Studying these things and understanding these things and questioning. That's one of the things that they don't really push in the West, is questioning. In the Eastern philosophy and Eastern thought, questioning is so powerful, such a potent tool. It's not giving you an answer, it's giving you a question. And we throw away the answers. Like, the answers are worthless. The questions are the value, right? When you have no more answer, the question dissolves. So that's kind of like the point. The question is just to get rid of the answers. Get rid of the answers. People are so ridiculously attached to their answer. Throw out your stupid answers. Your answers suck. All of them. All your answers suck. So just stick to the questions, because your answers are garbage. Right? Whatever answers you have, it's garbage. It's nonsense. Bullshit. It's ridiculous. Just throw away your answers. Stick to the questions, because you don't got anything right. Ultimately. Right? And I know that too. And that's why, I made the video, why astrology matters, why astrology doesn't matter. Because sometimes I'm like, who cares? None of this is really, but we're all just, one step at a time. And so, like, astrology might be a stepping stone for people. It is for me. And, I still use it, but it's not the final step. So we don't take it with, like, when you're walking up the steps, you don't hold on to each step as you keep going, right? You use a step and then you forget about it. It's not in your mind anymore. You used it, it's gone, right? So many things are like this, but we tend to hold on to them because we can't see the big picture. We're just like, oh, that step was so useful to me. I need to carry it with me everywhere I go, and like, constantly talk about it, even though I don't give a shit about it anymore. It's like, oh my God. Everything's just a step. It's useful as far as it's useful, and then it's no longer useful. So let it go. In any case, who am I? Figure it out. Stop taking yourself to be like some, like, concrete stone of a thing. Like, start questioning yourself, because you're not. You're full of illusion. You're full of shit. You're full of shit. We're all full of shit. So realize that you're full of shit, because that's all there is to realize. I mean, if you want to put it in really simple terms, Buddha realized that he was full of shit, and he realized how much everyone's full of shit. And Ramana Maharshi realized how much he's full of shit, and Jesus Christ realized how much he's full of shit, and he realized all the shit in the world, all everyone's full of shit. All the religions are full of shit. Everyone's full of shit, and that there's nothing but I want to say there's nothing but shit, but I'm just being ridiculous. There's nothing but the self, but the consciousness of God. So anyway, I said enough. Looking at this, it's excellent. I'm going to cover some other stuff at another time, and more astrology videos to come, because it's a stepping stone, useful, and then ultimately not useful. We're all God, we're all one, we're all consciousness. This is the truth, but figure it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Ask yourself, who am I? Start questioning. Discover how full of shit you are and how full of shit everyone else is. All right. That's it for now. See you again soon. Bye.